smartmoneyresults.com. The average American in the US, when they hear China, they may think dragons, large population, or the Great Wall. The somewhat informed American, when they think of China, they may see images of a booming economy, one-child policies, oppressive government, or even a threat to US security by a Chinese invasion. Now we will look at the reality of China in terms of its relation to the US and what some are now starting to believe, that China may be in a bubble. China is the second largest economy in the world. Their GDP is around $7.5 trillion US dollars. This is awfully close to half the United States' $15 trillion GDP. China's GDP grew 2,050% since 1990. In the same time, the US's GDP grew only 262%. The real growth is, of course, the world fiat money supplies. But these figures put into perspective the fact that China's economy has grown nearly 10 times the rate the US's has grown in the last 2 decades. In fact, in 2010, China topped the US and became the world's largest consumer of energy. The IMF even gave an official forecast of China overtaking US GDP in real terms by 2016.
Within 10 years, half the world's billionaires will come from China. While other countries are in panic mode over their stagnant economies, here they're making money and they're flaunting it.
But is it all good for China? Like the US, after the 2008 financial crisis, China passed a large stimulus bill, officially estimated at $586 billion in US dollars. Compared to China's GDP, this stimulus was massive, even compared to our own in the States. This year, plans are being debated for China to release an over $1.5 trillion spending plan to keep up their economic growth. In order to maintain their seemingly rapid economic growth, the National Development and Reform Commission of the People's Republic of China has approved a slew of highway and subway projects, power stations, wind farms, airports, and other things worth $158 billion, or about 2.1% of their GDP.
My notion with China is simply that the world may have made an error of judgment. It may be associating GDP growth with wealth creation. And I don't make that association. I think China is almost unsurpassed in its ability to create GDP growth. But that may be at the expense of wealth creation.
After investors lost faith in the stock market, and since savings and bonds don't even keep up with inflation, many wealthy Chinese and foreign investors looking to profit in China turn to real estate investment. The reality is that China's own housing sector could be in a larger bubble than the United States was. Average home prices in China tripled from 2005 to 2009. They are now experiencing the beginning of a burst in the housing bubble, with its effects rippling throughout the rest of their economy. China built apartments, homes, malls, even entire towns, before there was even a demand for these. They are now rightly dubbed ghost cities. The scale is so massive, in fact, there are 65 million vacant homes in China, enough to house 200 million people. That's 2/3 of the United States population. Beijing, which has a population of 20 million, has 50% more vacant housing than the entire US inventory of homes available for sale. Housing prices to income ratio in Beijing is 27:1, 5 times the international average. In the summer of 2011, Standard & Poor's downgraded its Chinese real estate development outlook to negative.
11 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and Zhengzhou CBD is deserted. Shops unoccupied, hundreds of apartments uninhabited. All the shops in this mall are empty. Not that that worries the government, because they're simply more concerned with maintaining economic growth. And one way of achieving that is building cities like this one.
China also hoarded commodities like copper, for example, that they increased imports by 48% in December 2011 from the previous December, importing over 500,000 tons of copper. Estimates put total stockpiles at 3.5 million tons. China has overestimated their growth in wasting tons of money on beefing up infrastructure and programs, only to see their stock market crash nearly 70%. the crash signifying the pop to the Chinese economy bubble. Hopefully this event and China's outcome will signify the poor practice of having a centrally controlled and commanded economy. A few months ago, China's central bank injected a record 290 billion yuan, or $46 billion into their economy. Even more recently, according to an official news agency, the government says it will ensure reasonable monetary-based growth and keep sufficient liquidity to allow businesses to obtain loans. Japan had a boom cycle similar to China's in the 1970s, where it saw its GDP more than triple. Japan's crash in 1990 led their country into stagnation that it still suffers from.
It was the boom time of the 1980s. A roaring Japanese economy, a soaring stock market, and real estate prices run completely wild. And when the bubble burst in the early 1990s, it left the country with what many refer to as the lost decades. Years of slow growth, rising debt, and consumers who were afraid to spend. The stock market, once nearing the 40,000 mark, still sits at less than 1/4 of that level.
And the final nail in the coffin to China's boom? Demographics. In 1965, 80% of China's population was not of working age. Most of them were children. This gave China a cheap labor force for the 4 decades. However, China's one-child policy has now created a demographics nightmare. By 2050, China will have more old people than the entire US population. China will have 438 million elderly. The Chinese family now consists of 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and 1 child. According to the latest data, 40% of China's population is now considered a dependent. China's demographic advantages ended. As a result, they have a shrinking labor pool. Over the next 10 years, China will lose 29.3 million working-age adults, which is forcing rising wages, which is leading to low-end manufacturing jobs moving to India and other parts of Southeast Asia. As China begins to peak, this will have a systemic impact on the global economy, as China has been one of the largest buyers of commodities and the world's debt, specifically the US.
2009, the first full year of their stimulus plan, they dumped something like $1.1 trillion into a then $4.3 trillion economy. So, did they create growth? Yes, they did. But they also created a stock market bubble, a property market bubble, and inflation. And they have yet to deal with the property market and the inflation problems. Those are dislocations that they don't have answers to. I would rather have our economic problems than theirs.
The writing is on the wall that China's economic boom of recent times has finally come to an end. If wages rise, China will lose jobs. If wages remain low, its citizens will continue to build ghost cities. Either way, the China bubble will eventually collapse. There will be no China century, just an illusion of an economic boom written about in history, much like the illusion of the West borrowing their way to prosperity. China has traded future growth for unsustainable growth in the present. SmartMoneyResults.com. Come visit us for financial wisdom and peace of mind in a volatile world.